For years, she had struggled with addiction.
It was a mix of both crack and alcohol.
She did have a tough stint with bad choices.
Until she finally made the right one.
Wow. Congratulations.
She was getting clean and sober.
She got baptized on Mother's Day.
I need to make this happen.
It was just a good feeling.
But the good feeling wouldn't last.
There was a suitcase floating in the water.
There was a body inside.
I was like, this is really happening.
Had life in the streets finally caught up to her?
There are bad people out there.
Violence happens, drug dealing.
She just had that addiction.
Or was it affection that proved fatal?
I don't think she thought he would really do anything like that.
This is a predator who's seeking out women that he can violate.
My mom didn't get a second chance.
May 18th, 2010. It's a Tuesday afternoon in San Francisco, and lots of people are strolling the Embarcadero, a bustling waterfront promenade in the city by the bay.
The Embarcadero in San Francisco is where the old port was, so it's like this long, kind of lovely promenade all along kind of the eastern section of the city.
You have cruise ships pulling in there. You have numerous restaurants down there, and there's all kinds of different things for the tourists to view.
But one local man, out for a stroll with his niece, soon spots something that isn't on the typical tourist itinerary.
What is this?
There was a suitcase in the water near the rocks, close to the seawall.
It was a fairly large suitcase, and by the way, it was partially submerged. It looked like something heavy was inside.
After spotting the suitcase, the man and his niece walked down to the firehouse at the foot of the Bay Bridge.
The firehouse is just very close to maybe 100 yards, 200 yards away.
The firehouse was where the department's fireboats and water rescue units were based.
They came over and somebody entered the water and retrieved the suitcase.
The firefighter, while he was pulling the suitcase up onto the rocks, the suitcase opened.
There was a body inside.
It was what appeared to be a female.
There's no ID on the body or anywhere in the suitcase.
There was no luggage tag or anything else.
But once the crime scene unit arrives on the scene, they'll soon discover the dead woman's name.
They take fingerprints, and it's checked through the computer database.
We were able to identify who she was by way of her fingerprints.
The woman in the suitcase was 52-year-old Perla Lewis.
Perla Lewis lived most of her life in the Bay Area.
My grandmother moved out here with her when she was a child, and she grew up in the Oakland area.
Perla had a good upbringing. She wasn't a street kid.
She had a huge personality. She was extremely funny.
Although on her way to adulthood, Perla took a wrong turn.
Perla connected with this girl that introduced her to the crack cocaine.
She did have a tough stint with bad choices and drug abuse.
As Perla got older, she still struggled with her addiction, even after experiencing the joy of becoming a mother.
She didn't hurt other people. She had her addiction, true enough, but she loved her family.
Even if she had to make some hard choices when it came to her children.
Growing up, we lived with our grandmother.
The alternative was for her to drag her kids and maybe be homeless.
Perla spent as much time with her kids as she could, but knew they were in good hands.
As an adult, I understood why she had my grandmother raise us. And so I was thankful that she did that because I understood the sacrifice that she made.
With her children safe with their grandmother, Perla gravitated to the part of San Francisco known as the Tenderloin.
It's an area that's down on its luck.
There was all these places called SROs, which are called single room occupancy hotels, which are all over the Tenderloin.
There are a lot of addicts out there. There's a lot of crime that's reported there.
But for Perla, it was home.
The Tenderloin was a place where she could just be herself, and there was no judgment.
We would go over there. We got to see that other side.
We lived in like two very different worlds. With my grandmother, we went to private schools, went to church, played sports, piano, and then like with my mom, our community was completely different because it was the drug dealers and the drug users.
All the while, Perla continued struggling with her own demons.
There were plenty of times when she would say she was done with it and she was working on getting clean and sober. It was kind of like a back and forth struggle.
For much of that time, she wasn't fighting alone. For 10 years, she lived with a fellow addict named David.
He was probably the longest relationship she had, and he would come around the family, holidays.
You wouldn't look at them and have been like, oh, they're on drugs. You would have never guessed that they were struggling the way that they were. But they did, they struggled.
There were times when they were panhandling together on the streets.
Until David finally decided to make a change.
David basically was like, it's time to get our lives together.
He came back and got my mom, and he actually had got my mom clean.
But sobriety was no guarantee against tragedy.
She called us, and she was like, David died. He died from a heart attack.
Within like weeks, she was back in the Tenderloin. It was toxic and unhealthy.
Perla wasn't a bad person. She wasn't robbing people. She just had that addiction.
She would drift between various single occupancy hotel rooms in and around the Tenderloin area.
But she was rarely alone.
After David, she's kind of bounced around in different relationships and not the healthiest ones.
Until at the end of 2008, she started seeing a man named Lee Bell.
She did bring Lee over at times to meet the family.
Nice to meet you.
He came around and he got introduced to everybody.
Your kids, they're nice.
Thanks. Not sure I deserve the credit, though.
Oh, don't sell yourself short.
And by the spring of 2010, there were signs that Perla was finally getting her life back on track.
Perla had checked herself into a treatment center where she could live while she got healthy.
Then, on May 9th, she took another important step.
She got baptized on Mother's Day.
She just renewed her commitment to God.
Everybody coming for this big ceremony to see her baptized. And so it was just a good feeling.
But after church, Perla headed back to the Tenderloin.
And I'm like, man, we want to take you out. And she was like, well, I'm about to go eat with my friends. I gave her a hug, and I was like, I love you.
See you later, Mom. Love you.
I love you so much. Mom. I love you too. See you later.
We didn't know that was the last time that we were going to see her alive.
Now, more than a week later, police have found Perla's body in a suitcase by the bay.
There was a news story, and they were saying that it was a woman that had been found in a suitcase.
If somebody's put in a suitcase is news. I mean, more than just if somebody's murdered, because it's gruesome, you know.
The woman's name hadn't been released to the public yet, but Perla's family just had this sinking feeling about it.
I texted my sister, stuff like this makes me think of Mom.
On Mother's Day 2010, after years of struggling with drug addiction, 52-year-old Perla Lewis made what friends and family hoped was a big step towards getting her life back on track.
She joined church, she got baptized, she had reconnected with God.
Just knowing that she went ahead and took that step was very comforting.
Now, 9 days later, firefighters have dragged Perla's body out of the San Francisco Bay.
She'd been stuffed into a suitcase.
It wasn't a huge suitcase, and the body was positioned like a fetal position.
We estimate she had been in the water at least overnight, so maybe 10 hours, if not more.
There's almost no evidence of decomposition.
The bay water in San Francisco is anywhere from 45 degrees to around 55 degrees.
However, while the condition of the body makes identification easy, there's nothing to indicate how she died.
The police try to keep a relatively open mind and make sure that it was not perhaps where somebody else found the body and just wanted to hide it.
We don't know if, maybe she died of natural causes. Maybe she had overdosed, or who knows, had a heart attack and someone was trying just to get rid of the body.
While the medical examiner's crew removes the body for autopsy, detectives head back to the station and dig into the dead woman's background.
There was a missing persons report stating that Perla Lewis was missing from this residential care facility.
Although staff at the treatment facility had made the report, it does list Perla's next of kin.
We made contact with Perla's daughter, and we set up an appointment to talk to her.
When Aisha Lewis arrives at the station, she confirms that she and her siblings didn't initially worry about their mom going off the radar.
The place that she was staying filed a missing persons report, but there have been times before where it would be a couple of days when we didn't hear from her. So it wasn't quite alarming.
For the moment, detectives hold off on telling Aisha that her mother is dead.
We did not tell her because we wanted to receive all the information without a built-in bias to whoever Perla was around.
They were asking me questions about my mom. Who are her friends? Where does she go? What does she do?
What Aisha tells detectives makes an accidental overdose sound like a distinct possibility.
I mean, she's had some issues for a long time.
What kind of issues?
Drugs.
When you're in that lifestyle of drug abuse, it's always an up and down roller coaster. Sometimes she's in a program, sometimes she, wouldn't be.
According to Aisha, though, her mom had been working really hard to get her life back on track.
She even got baptized a couple of weeks ago. She's really trying to turn things around for good this time.
Aisha also confirms that Perla had been living at the treatment facility up until her disappearance.
Are there any men in her life?
Yeah, she's been seeing this guy, Lee Bell, for a couple of years.
Have you met him?
A few times. He's a nice guy.
But as the interview continues, Aisha begins to grow uneasy.
It seems though she knew in the back of her mind that we're there for more than a missing person.
I was like, look, sir, I've been answering your questions. What's going on? What are we doing here?
I'm just wondering, have you seen the news?
I have.
It was on every single channel. Woman found in a suitcase.
I'm afraid that I have some really bad news.
When we told Aisha that the person in the suitcase was her mother, it was terrible.
No.
And I lost it.
No.
And I believe she said that she knew it. She just knew it.
I knew it.
She ran out of the room in tears, and that's not what we wanted, but that's how it happened.
It was the worst feeling I have ever felt.
After her interview, Aisha shares the tragic news with her siblings.
I was like, that was Mom? And then from there, I lost it. I remember, I think I was punching walls, I busted my knuckles somehow. I will never forget that. Never in life. It was the worst. It was the worst day ever.
I lived very close to my brother. I was walking home and I saw my sister's car. And before they said anything to me, I knew.
While Perla's family struggles with their grief, the detectives try to retrace her final movements.
We went to the residential care facility, and we ended up interviewing the individual who reported Perla missing.
She was doing such a good job here.
I don't know the whole program down there, but she seemed to be slowing down. She looked better too. And when I'd see her, you know, she didn't look like she had been using.
The nurse tells detectives that Perla asked for a day pass out of the facility on May 16th.
Any idea where she went when she left here?
Well, I know where she said she was going.
According to the nurse, Perla had plans with her boyfriend, Lee Bell.
Did she say where?
Well, no, just that she was meeting up with him to get some money.
And that was the last time that they saw her.
She kind of fell off the map after that.
A city with a long history of drug use. Roughly 4,000 people are admitted for substance abuse treatment in San Francisco each year. In 2013, alcohol was the primary substance abused by patients admitted for treatment. Heroin was the second highest, followed by cocaine and methamphetamine. San Francisco detectives investigating the death of Perla Lewis have just learned that she'd signed herself out of a treatment center in order to see her boyfriend, Lee Bell.
Perla had confided in the nurse that she was going to see Lee Bell because Lee owed her money.
I begged her not to go see him.
Why?
I thought he was a bad influence.
Everyone who worked at this care facility knew Lee Bell.
The staff also knew that Lee was a fellow addict.
Was it possible that Perla left the treatment center and fell right back into her old habits?
That was like typical, you know, behavior. Doing stints in the hospital, like that's vacation, you know, to get herself back on her feet, and then she's back out again. That was tough, you know, just kind of the up and down of her drug abuse and her lifestyle.
Back at the station, running Lee's name through the database provides detectives with an address.
He was on probation for grand theft.
According to his probation records, Lee's last known address was a residential hotel in the Tenderloin district.
We ended up going to that address. There, the desk clerk was able to positively identify Lee Bell as the person who'd been staying there, and then we showed him a picture of Perla. And he said, oh, yes, she had visited Mr. Bell on a number of occasions, and the last time was on Sunday, May 16th, at approximately 7 o'clock in the evening.
When was the last time you saw them?
The clerk tells detectives he saw Lee and Perla leave the hotel together.
We're able to establish a timeline that he was the one person last seen with Perla alive in front of that hotel.
After talking to the clerk, detectives go and knock on Lee's door.
Mr. Bell?
Yeah?
We're here to ask you a few questions about Perla Lewis.
Perla? Is she some type of trouble or something?
When told that she was dead, he just said, I didn't know that. When did that happen?
We found her this morning.
Afraid it'd be something like that.
Of course, Lee and Perla were both addicts, so her ending up dead wasn't necessarily a total surprise.
He didn't seem shocked. He really didn't show a whole lot of emotion.
When was the last time you saw her?
Sunday. She came by here.
When?
7:30, something like that.
Lee's story had fit with what detectives had learned from the desk clerk and the nurse.
Lee also provides a detail that detectives didn't know.
We heard she needed some money.
She got herself in a little bit of trouble.
According to Lee, Perla owed money to a street dealer named Chubb.
Chubb?
Yeah, that's what they called him.
Lee says he doesn't know Chubb's real name, only that he hangs around Bodecker Park in the Tenderloin.
At the time, Bodecker Park was pretty notorious for drug trafficking.
Violence happens there, drug dealing, prostitution.
It was really nobody's turf. There was drug dealers from all over the place, kind of just out there, just selling drugs.
Could a debt to a dealer explain why Perla's body ended up in the bay?
Crime in the Tenderloin was around drug lifestyle. And for example, someone being ripped off because of the drugs, or selling drugs and getting ripped off because they're selling drugs, things of that nature.
When she left here, was she going to see Chubb?
I really don't know.
Lee said he didn't know what, if anything, happened between Chubb and Perla.
But he does know one thing.
He denied any involvement with Perla's death.
Mind if we look around? No, go ahead.
Thanks.
A quick search of the hotel room doesn't reveal anything suspicious, nor is there any indication that Lee had been involved in any sort of struggle.
I don't remember any injuries to Lee.
However, that didn't mean detectives were entirely ready to write him off.
When we were done with our interview, what we ended up doing is set up a surveillance team to follow him.
Then, when detectives arrive back at the station, they get their first solid piece of evidence.
The medical examiner's office completed their report.
The autopsy reveals extensive bruising that wasn't visible to investigators at the scene.
The pathologist noted over 30 contusions on her body.
But it's another injury that really tells the tale.
Perla had a broken hyoid. That's a bone in her neck.
She had been strangled.
This was definitely a murder.
24 hours after firefighters pulled a suitcase containing Perla Lewis's body from San Francisco Bay, police are officially investigating her murder.
The medical examiner's office ruled her death a homicide.
A bone in her neck was broken, suggesting to the pathologist that she had been strangled.
Detectives also have a possible lead on her killer.
According to Perla's boyfriend, Lee Bell, she owed money to a street dealer named Chubb.
Chubb supposedly deals around Bodecker Park, a seedy hangout spot in the part of town known as the Tenderloin.
The park's been cleaned up since Perla's murder, but in 2010, it was pretty notorious for crime.
It's not a place where you want to find yourself. There's a lot of narcotics, there's a lot of thefts, there's a lot of violence that happens there.
Hoping to get a lead on the mysterious Chubb, detectives head down to the park.
Hey, how are you doing today?
I'm good.
They started canvassing the homeless who spent most of their days camped out around the park.
Thanks.
I'm gonna ask you a few questions.
Oftentimes, folks don't want to cooperate with the police because that in and of itself carries ramifications from other people in the neighborhood.
Despite that, many of the regulars around the park are willing to answer questions about Perla. However, it's a different story when detectives ask about the drug dealer Perla was supposedly in debt to.
Familiar with that name? Anybody that goes by that?
Everyone detectives talked to claimed that they'd never heard of a dealer that went by Chubb.
But does that mean he doesn't exist?
In a lot of different homicide cases, there's people out there that witnessed it and they won't come forward because they're afraid or they think that someone's going to call them snitch. But it's all about do what's right.
While detectives canvass the park, Perla's family blankets the area with flyers.
We were out down by the Embarcadero passing out flyers, just trying to figure out what happened.
The woman in the suitcase also got plenty of coverage in the local press.
I remember there being a push to solve it because it was a touristy area. It was such an egregious crime.
Feeling the heat, homicide detectives reach out to the narcotics unit, hoping they have info on the elusive Chubb.
Unfortunately, no one in the narcotics unit had any leads for detectives.
It could be anybody. Perla could have met somebody during the course of the week or the month. The people on the street only know so much.
A search through the database is no help either.
However, when detectives ran Perla's name through their computer, something did pop up.
We run her through the databases to gain any additional information that would help us to determine what may have happened.
In addition to the missing persons report, we were also able to see that there was a documented history of domestic violence.
Some of the reports involve Perla's boyfriend, Lee Bell.
Perla had made accusations that Lee had assaulted her. And then there was another event where Lee had made an accusation where Perla had threatened him. That's when we really started looking at Lee Bell as a potential person of interest.
Despite the accusations in the reports, neither of those cases resulted in an arrest.
As to why that is, I don't know. I can speculate that there wasn't enough corroborative information to make an arrest, or that maybe Perla Lewis had changed her mind about having Lee arrested.
Lee's name isn't the only one in the reports, though.
Perla Lewis and Lee Bell, we know, were in an on and off relationship. At least in one occasion, she provided a different name.
Did Perla have another boyfriend that no one knew about? The other man's name appears in a report dated January of 2010, 4 months prior to Perla's murder.
According to the report, Perla had gone to the emergency room with 4 broken ribs and a gash on her forehead.
Perla Lewis told doctors that she was abused.
The hospital called the police.
One of our investigators from the domestic violence unit did show up to conduct a follow-up.
And when police arrived, Perla identified her assailant.
She was interviewed.
It was my boyfriend.
She did say my boyfriend.
According to Perla, his name was Colin Humphreys.
Detectives investigating the murder of Perla Lewis have learned that 4 months prior to her death, she had accused a man named Colin Humphreys of assaulting her.
That time, she had broken ribs, broken fingers.
If this guy, Colin Humphreys, put Perla in the hospital, he could definitely be her killer.
Was he also the mysterious drug dealer the detectives had been trying to locate?
According to Perla's boyfriend, Lee Bell, she owed money to a dealer who went by the street name of Chubb.
When the homicide detectives dig a little deeper into the report, they make a disturbing discovery.
The police officer who interviewed Perla about her injuries did so with Lee Bell in the room.
Lee Bell was sitting right next to her, and Perla introduced him, and he introduced himself as her brother.
That's my brother, Lee Bell.
The question is, why would Perla lie to police about who Lee was?
To the detectives investigating Perla's murder, the answer seems obvious.
Rather than a man named Colin, in reality, it was probably Lee who would put her in the hospital.
The detective is interviewing her about her injuries while the abuser is in the room.
Of course, when she was interviewed, she named some random name so that it wasn't tied back to him.
Now suspicious of Lee, detectives reach out to Perla's friends and family, but they have little firsthand knowledge of abuse.
My mom didn't speak to me much about him.
She never said, oh, he'd slap me or push me in the wall or anything, nothing. She never did she say a word to me.
She definitely kept a lot from me about his abusive nature.
However, the family says they did have their suspicions.
There was nothing that I remember that was just glaring. It was just something like, something is not right, you know?
There was an incident maybe 6 months into their relationship where he broke her arm, and I was like, Mom, like, what happened to your arm? And she told me that she had got robbed in the Tenderloin.
She would cover it up and say there was something else. And come to find out it was him.
I think that my mother did not know her worth and didn't know her own strength, and that's why she stayed with him.
Maybe she just felt like she had it under control or something. I don't know.
But now detectives believe her love for Lee ultimately cost Perla her life.
Other than Lee Bell, our investigation did not identify anybody else as a possible suspect.
At this point, detectives doubted that Colin or the drug dealer Chubb even existed.
Detectives figure it's time they paid another visit to Lee Bell. But he's given the surveillance team the slip.
When they contacted the hotel where Lee was staying, they also discovered that he had checked out.
Since Lee Bell was on probation, we got in contact with the probation department.
Legally, he was supposed to let his probation officer know whenever there was a change of address.
Lee Bell was in fact in violation of the conditions of his probation.
During the course of the investigation, there's a lot of ups and downs.
But there's also an unexpected break.
I looked at my answering machine at work, and the red light was on.
The story had been released to the media at this point, and we had a lot of anonymous leads coming in.
And one lead seems more promising than most.
I listened to it, and it was the person from the Drake Hotel.
The Drake is another single-room occupancy residential hotel in the Tenderloin.
The manager of the Drake Hotel happened to be on vacation when this investigation was in its early steps. And he came back to the Drake, and he saw a flyer with Perla's picture on their bulletin board, and he gave us a phone call.
He said he may have information about Perla's murder.
When detectives go to the hotel and speak with the manager, he says that he knows Lee quite well.
Hello.
Mr. Lee had been a resident at this place from December 1999 up until March of
San Francisco PD. Are you the one that called?
2010, right on there.
Have you seen him since he moved out?
Yes, that's why I called you. He showed up on
And he
the
alerted
17th
us to the fact that on May 17th, Monday,
to retrieve a
Mr. Lee
suitcase
showed up
that we
at
had
that
been
hotel and had retrieved a suitcase that he had in storage.
A suitcase?
Yeah.
May 17th was the day before firefighters had fished the suitcase containing Perla's body out of the bay.
Can you describe it to us?
Actually, I can just show you if you'd like to come around.
He has video of Lee Bell at the hotel picking up a suitcase.
And when detectives look closely, it's clear it's not just any suitcase.
Sure enough, had striking similarities to the suitcase that was recovered with Perla inside of it.
She was a poor black woman, and poor black women are more likely to end up this way than anybody else in terms of how it works in America, and nobody seems to care. My coverage, when I was doing this kind of stuff, I was always trying to do the kind of work that would at least make sure that anybody who died or was killed in San Francisco deserved to have their story told.
Detectives investigating the murder of Perla Lewis have just uncovered what appears to be a crucial piece of evidence against her boyfriend, Lee Bell.
The day before firefighters fished the suitcase containing Perla's body from the San Francisco Bay, Lee was caught on camera doing something pretty incriminating.
It was Mr. Lee showing up and retrieving the suitcase from this particular hotel.
The hotel's security cameras had recorded the entire incident.
On the surveillance video, the case itself was the exact configuration of the one that we had recovered. Even the stitching, the piping, I had very little doubt in my mind that this was a suitcase.
However, the surveillance video alone isn't enough for an arrest.
Well, that was pivotal for us, but still circumstantial.
But even as detectives continue to work the case, their prime suspect ends up in custody.
The day after that, Lee Bell was taken into custody by the probation department for having violated his felony probation conditions.
Once detectives learn that Lee is in custody, they arrange to go down to the county jail to question him.
We confronted Mr. Lee again to see if we could get him to provide us some admissions.
But Lee isn't about to admit to anything.
I already told you guys all that I know.
He held true to his story that he did not kill Perla. He didn't know how she died.
He also insists he'd never hurt Perla.
Man, she was the one that used to hurt me.
He tried to portray himself as the victim, that Perla was the one that had anger issues.
Which was the exact opposite of everything that friends and family had told police about Perla.
Perla wasn't a violent person at all. And if she hit him, it was probably just trying to keep him from hitting her.
My mom was not abusing that man.
In addition to being violent, Lee also accuses Perla of being unfaithful.
He tried to throw, oh, you know, she was with other people.
One of them must have killed her.
He said, you know, when I get out of here, I'm gonna find out who did this.
But detectives are convinced they already have her killer. And on June 7th, 2010, they finally get the proof they've been waiting for.
Our crime lab recovered Lee Bell's DNA from the handle of the suitcase where Perla was placed and thrown into the water.
Once they have the DNA results, detectives officially charge Lee with first-degree murder.
That, for us, was the last nail in his coffin. With that information, we were able to charge him.
It's welcome news for Perla's family.
The detectives, they did amazing work. And I'm thankful that the police had arrested him.
It was very intense, emotional, and I cried, and I cried, and I cried.
I was just happy that he was off the streets.
But the family's quest for justice is just beginning.
There's all kinds of ways that you can delay a trial now.
He would play games with the legal system, and it was incredibly frustrating.
He kept changing attorneys, and that extended the time that he remained in San Francisco County Jail by years and years and years.
At one point, they came to me with a plea deal, and I was livid. I felt like that was a slap in the face, and I just revved it up. I don't care what happens. Take it all the way to the appeals.
It's not until May 18th, 2017, 7 years after Perla's murder, that Lee Bell finally goes on trial.
Perla's family was suffering for that 7 years, but Lee Bell was still in jail. It's not as though he gained this great advantage.
But is he just delaying the inevitable? Or is a conviction anything but guaranteed?
There was no murder scene that the prosecution could ever give. Like, where did this occur?
We were unable to really determine exactly where the suitcase entered the water.
When you look at the case overall, there isn't that beautiful, clear-cut moment where you know.
Instead, the prosecutors begin by laying out Lee's history of abusing Perla.
There were a number of domestic violence reports involved in this relationship.
Therefore, it isn't all that difficult for prosecutors to construct a theory of what happened.
Prosecutors claim that just as she told the nurses when she left the treatment facility, Perla had gone to see Lee looking for money.
You owe me
What
money.
money?
Lee, I want you to pay me.
Girl, I don't owe you no money.
According to prosecutors, an argument likely ensued, and Lee became violent.
At some point, Lee must have started choking Perla, and whether he meant to or not, it went too far.
Even worse, he didn't go pick up the suitcase from the other hotel until the next day, which means he stayed in his room overnight with her body.
If we're in a hotel room and you kill me, how are you going to get my body out? It's probably going to be a suitcase.
It could have been the perfect crime.
With Perla's history of addiction and the dangerous people she had contact with on the streets, there had been a lot of explanations if she had simply disappeared.
If the tide would have been going out, we'd have never known what happened to Perla.
Instead, The tide had carried the suitcase back to the Embarcadero.
They had the surveillance of him with the suitcase.
We did have a one-to-one hit from a sample that we took from Lee Bell to DNA recovered from the handle of the suitcase.
It's enough for the jury to find Lee guilty of first-degree murder.
Mr. Lee's sentence was 25 years to life.
If there's justice, I guess it was served.
Despite their pain, Perla's children have tried to draw some positive lessons from the tragic loss of their mother.
When a person doesn't know their worth, they'll settle for way less than they should. You are worth so much more than being with someone who will put their hands on you or will belittle you.
Whenever you are faced with a decision, whether it's to leave or stay, remember my mom didn't get a second chance to make a better choice.
Abuse is never okay. If you or someone you love is in an abusive relationship, there is help available. Call the Domestic Violence Hotline at 1-800-799-SAFE.
Approximately 10. A clock marked their last conversation. He described her demeanor as entirely normal, noting that she had telephoned to inform him she was running late from campus and intended to grab a bite to eat before returning home. Darren stated he retired for the evening around 11:30, assuming Latrice might have elected to visit her family instead of returning directly to their apartment. Upon waking the following morning, Darren discovered Latrice was not in bed. He placed a phone call that routed directly to voicemail, leaving a brief message, checking on her well-being. Assuming she was still asleep or delayed, he proceeded with his morning routine and departed for work around 7:30. En route, he encountered the traffic blockage and the ensuing horrific discovery. While Darren's narrative possessed a logical exterior, investigators found the sheer coincidence of his discovering his wife's vehicle and arriving at the cordon scene prior to police notification to be deeply suspicious. Beneath the veneer of domestic harmony, detectives suspected undiscovered friction within the marriage. Consequently, Darren was escorted to the precinct for formal questioning. Detectives requested that Darren unbutton his sleeves and expose his arms and hands for inspection. They meticulously photographed his skin, searching for defensive wounds, cuts, or abrasions. He was likewise asked to loosen his collar. The visual inspection yielded no outward indicators that Darren had recently engaged in a violent physical altercation. Nevertheless, standard protocol demanded rigorous interrogation. When questioned regarding potential marital discord, Darren steadfastly maintained that he and Latrice shared a deeply loving relationship devoid of serious problems. He readily consented to a search of their residence and his personal automobile. The subsequent search of the apartment and Darren's vehicle revealed no signs of a struggle, nor did forensic processing yield any physical evidence linking him to the homicide. Consequently, detectives released Darren that afternoon with instructions to remain available within the jurisdiction. Almost concurrently, the release of Latrice's autopsy report introduced a startling new element into the investigation. The medical examiner discovered a condom physically retained within the victim's body. This finding confirmed recent sexual activity, though the autopsy confirmed the absence of genital trauma consistent with a sexual assault. This revelation generated profound new inquiries. Whose condom was it, and could a clandestine sexual encounter have ignited the fatal rage? Escalating the salacious nature of the inquiry, investigators subpoenaed the telephone records of both Darren and Latrice. A meticulous review of Darren's call logs corroborated his statements, including the outgoing call placed to Latrice the following morning. However, a parallel examination of Latrice's phone records exposed a flurry of incoming and outgoing communications with an entirely different telephone number occurring around midnight immediately preceding her murder. Tracing this mysterious number led detectives directly to an individual named Stephen Randolph. The identification of Stephen Randolph represented a pivotal turning point in unraveling the tragedy. Stephen Randolph was quickly identified as one of the most prominent bachelors on the campus of North Carolina Central University. Possessing striking physical attributes, he was an accomplished student-athlete who played basketball with aspirations of securing a professional contract within the National Basketball Association. While campus acquaintances were uncertain of the precise depth of his connection to Latrice, rumors confirmed that Stephen and Latrice had grown significantly close during the preceding months, engaging in frequent socialization and overt flirtation. Determined to clarify the exact nature of their association, law enforcement sought out Stephen Randolph. Merely 2 days following the discovery of Latrice's body, Stephen walked voluntarily into the Wake County Sheriff's Office. He was accompanied through the front doors by his roommate, a local Durham pastor named Robert Reeves. Pastor Reeves had insisted upon accompanying Stephen to ensure he spoke with detectives regarding the Latrice Curtis inquiry. Escorted into a private interrogation room, Stephen faced direct inquiries regarding his relationship with the victim. He initially characterized Latrice merely as a classmate whom he had met the previous September, downplaying their connection as strictly platonic friendship centered around occasional study sessions. However, when confronted directly with the damning telephone records and the explicit findings of the autopsy report, Stephen's defensive posture crumbled. He conceded the necessity of honesty, admitting that he and Latrice maintained a private, intimate relationship. He confessed that Latrice had visited his residence on the very night of the murder, marking only her second visit to the home, and that they had engaged in a passionate sexual encounter. During this encounter, a condom had become trapped internally, and despite joint efforts, they had proved unable to extract it. Stephen stated that Latrice elected to return to her own residence to resolve the issue privately in her own bathroom, departing his home at approximately 10 o'clock in the evening, with Stephen departing shortly thereafter to clear his head by driving around the city. Stephen claimed that after cruising the streets for a period, he eventually arrived at the residence of his primary girlfriend, Thelma Newton. According to Stephen's narrative, shortly after his arrival at Thelma's home, Latrice began bombarding his mobile phone with calls. The root of her frantic communication stemmed from the terrifying realization that she was returning to her husband, while still retaining another man's used contraceptive device inside her body. Coupled with anxious discussions regarding the remote possibility of pregnancy resulting from the liaison, Stephen insisted that these frantic calls constituted the entirety of their late-night communication and vehemently denied any physical involvement in her subsequent murder. While Stephen maintained his innocence, investigators questioned his initial dishonesty and sought to verify his alibi regarding his visit to Thelma Newton. Seeking corroboration, detectives turned their attention towards Stephen's roommate, the 43-year-old Pastor Robert Reeves, affectionately known within the Durham evangelical community as the Bishop. Reeves was recognized locally as a charismatic motivational speaker. During questioning, Pastor Reeves explained that he had crossed paths with Stephen at a local car wash during the late summer of 2007. Stephen had communicated financial distress, unemployment, and a desperate need for housing. Moved by compassion, Reeves had offered Stephen the use of a furnished basement apartment within his personal residence for a nominal monthly rent of $300. When questioned concerning the events of January 29th, Pastor Reeves confirmed that Latrice had indeed visited the home that evening to see Stephen, noting that her arrival coincided with his own departure for a scheduled church service. Reeves stated he departed the residence at approximately 8:15 in the evening and returned home around 11:30. Upon his return, he observed that both Stephen's vehicle and Latrice's car were absent from the premises. Furthermore, Reeves disclosed that on the following morning, Stephen had confided in him regarding the late-night phone calls from Latrice concerning her desire to escalate their relationship into something more permanent. Reeves noted that Stephen had appeared noncommittal, viewing the liaison as a casual encounter rather than the foundation for a long-term commitment. This newly revealed dynamic prompted investigators to contemplate a darker motive. If Latrice harbored genuine intentions of pursuing a serious relationship with Stephen, could the young basketball hopeful have viewed her and the perceived threat of an unwanted pregnancy as an insurmountable stumbling block on his path to a multi-million-dollar professional athletic contract? Such a scenario represented a glaring red flag. Compounding these suspicions, Pastor Reeves casually mentioned during the interview that Stephen maintained an extensive collection of knives and swords inside the residence. This detail elevated the investigation into an entirely new tier of urgency. Equipped with the knowledge that the victim had suffered dozens of stab wounds, and that the prime suspect maintained an arsenal of edged weapons, law enforcement secured and executed search warrants for Randolph's home and automobile. Despite hours of meticulous forensic combing, technicians recovered no signs of a physical struggle and no obvious murder weapon within the premises. Concurrently, detectives worked to verify Stephen's alibi by interviewing his girlfriend, Thelma Newton. Thelma confirmed that Stephen had arrived at her Apartment around 10 o'clock on the night of the murder and remained until approximately 1 in the morning. This timeline aligned broadly with Stevens' narrative. However, given that the coroner placed Latrice's estimated time of death between 1 and 2 in the morning, Stevens' alibi left a narrow window of opportunity. When specifically asked whether Stephen had displayed any unusual behavior that evening, Thelma expressed absolute disbelief regarding his potential involvement, characterizing him as a wonderful man incapable of such violence. Intriguingly, Thelma added a bizarre detail to the narrative. She and Stephen had recently been subjected to a barrage of anonymous, harassing phone calls designed to sabotage their relationship. Furthermore, these menacing communications had extended directly to Stephen, warning him to cease his current trajectory or face physical harm that would jeopardize his athletic career. Thelma recounted an even more alarming escalation upon leaving her apartment one evening. Stephen discovered that all 4 tires on his vehicle had been maliciously slashed. While investigators processed the implications of the slashed tires and harassing calls, an unexpected piece of historical evidence emerged from State Trooper Isaac Cooper. Trooper Cooper contacted authorities regarding a routine motorist assist he had personally investigated along Interstate 540 on January 30th at approximately 1:30 in the morning, merely 6 hours prior to the discovery of Latrice's body. Cooper recounted that while patrolling for disabled vehicles, he observed an automobile parked on the eastbound shoulder with its hazard lights activated. Upon approaching the vehicle, he found the driver's seat unoccupied. While running the license plate through dispatch, he scanned the opposite side of the highway and noticed a second vehicle stationed on the westbound shoulder, likewise displaying active hazard lights. Detectives instantly recognized the description of this second vehicle as a definitive match for Latrice Curtis's car. Before Trooper Cooper could investigate the second vehicle, dispatch reassigned him to an urgent priority call. However, prior to departing the scene, he received the registration results for the first abandoned vehicle. Dispatch confirmed that the automobile was registered not to a stranger, but to Robert Reeves, residing in Durham, North Carolina. The realization that Pastor Robert Reeves's personal vehicle had been abandoned on the exact highway and during the precise time frame in which Latrice Curtis was murdered transformed the trajectory of the inquiry. Investigators were forced to confront a profoundly disturbing hypothesis. Had Stephen Randolph utilized the pastor's vehicle to stalk and eliminate Latrice, or was Pastor Robert Reeves himself directly implicated in the horrific crime? Summoned back to the station for a rigorous second round of interrogation, Pastor Reeves maintained his prior narrative, adamantly denying that he had driven his vehicle anywhere on the night of the murder and insisting he remained home following his return from church. However, he conceded that Stephen maintained an independent set of keys and possessed unrestricted permission to utilize the pastor's car when necessary. Seeking to corroborate the pastor's timeline, detectives interviewed his roommate and sister, Willa May Thorpe, while Reeves claimed to have attended a specific church service that evening, a service his sister likewise claimed to attend. Willa May explicitly stated that she never observed her brother inside the sanctuary. This glaring contradiction shattered the pastor's alibi, establishing that he had lied to law enforcement. Confronted with these discrepancies, detectives requested that Pastor Reeves roll up his sleeves. The resulting inspection revealed deep, prominent scratches and abrasions adorning his arms and hands. When asked to account for these injuries, Reeves offered a clumsy explanation, claiming he had sustained the scratches while moving a heavy desk backward with Stephen. Upon re-interviewing Stephen Randolph regarding the alleged desk-moving incident, Stephen expressed total bewilderment, denying any recollection of moving furniture or any accident resulting in injury to the pastor. Furthermore, Stephen offered a startling revelation regarding the pastor's psychological state. Stephen recounted that following Latrice's visits, Reeves exhibited bizarre behavior, frequently descending to Stephen's quarters to inquire about his female visitors. According to Stephen, the pastor had recently propositioned him in an extraordinarily disturbing manner. Reeves had allegedly asked Stephen if he had ever considered working as a male escort, proceeded to ask explicit questions regarding his anatomy, and ultimately offered to waive his monthly rent entirely if Stephen would consent to performing oral sex upon the pastor. Stephen stated he firmly rebuffed these advances, prompting an immediate apology from Reeves. However, Stephen noted that the anonymous harassing phone calls and the vandalism of his vehicle occurred shortly after this bizarre boundary was established. A subpoena of Pastor Reeves's telephone records provided the definitive link. Investigators discovered that Reeves had placed numerous blocked phone calls to both Stephen and Thelma Newton, confirming that the pastor himself was the source of the harassing threats. It became agonizingly apparent that Robert Reeves was consumed by a toxic, jealous infatuation with Stephen Randolph, viewing any romantic rival, male or female, with homicidal malice. Furthermore, background checks exposed a dark, compartmentalized history of sexual deviance and prior assaults against young men, revealing Reeves to be a predatory individual hiding behind the facade of a holy man. The convergence of the psychological profile, the lies regarding his alibi, the physical scratches, and the forensic evidence transformed Pastor Reeves from a witness into the primary suspect. Concurrently, the state crime lab finalized the deoxyribonucleic acid profiling derived from the biological samples collected inside Latrice's vehicle. The analysis confirmed a mixed profile on the steering wheel, while a portion belonged to Latrice, an undeniable secondary genetic match pointed directly to Robert Reeves. The physical narrative solidified. Investigators theorized that a deeply obsessed Robert Reeves had monitored Latrice's movements, tracked her vehicle from his residence to the interstate, forced her to pull over, and subjected her to a frenzied, fatal assault out of a psychotic delusion that eliminating her would clear a path to Stephen Randolph's affections. on February 2nd, 2008, law enforcement formally charged Pastor Robert Lee Adams Reeves with the first-degree murder of Latrice Curtis. The announcement sent shockwaves through the religious and civic communities of Durham. Initial reactions among church members encompassed utter disbelief, with many insisting authorities had targeted the wrong man. However, as the mountain of evidence materialized, supporters quietly distanced themselves. The trial commenced on September 29, 2009, inside a Raleigh courtroom. Prosecutors laid out a chilling narrative depicting a respected clergyman consumed by an illicit, violent obsession. The state argued that Reeves followed Latrice onto Interstate 540, manipulated her into stopping, and unleashed a frenzied attack driven by jealous delusion. The defense attempted to pivot the blame back towards Stephen Randolph, arguing that the athletic hopeful possessed a far more potent motive, the preservation of his multi-million-dollar career against the perceived threat of a complicated entanglement. Defense attorneys highlighted the presence of Stephen's genetic material beneath the victim's fingernails, though prosecutors countered that this DNA was the natural byproduct of their consensual encounter earlier that evening. To reinforce their case, prosecutors placed Stephen Randolph on the stand, where he recounted the grotesque sexual propositions forced upon him by the pastor. Additionally, expert testimony dismantled the defense's transfer DNA theory, emphasizing the implausibility of circumstantial transfer in the face of the overwhelming genetic concentration matching Reeves inside the victim's automobile, coupled with the fresh defensive scratches adorning the pastor's arms and his demonstrably false alibi regarding church attendance. On October 7, 2009, the jury commenced deliberations. 2 days later, they returned an unequivocal verdict: guilty of first-degree murder. Robert Lee Adams Reeves was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. While the verdict offered a degree of formal justice, the psychological scars remained permanently etched upon the surviving family members, leaving Darren Curtis and Latrice's father to navigate a world forever diminished by senseless malice. The thematic transition from rural North Carolina to Gainesville, Texas, unspools another intricate study of human frailty, professional devotion, and domestic tragedy. The narrative centers upon an idealized romance between a dedicated single mother seeking renewal and a small-town police officer who lived and breathed his sworn duty to protect and serve. He bled blue, embodying the absolute ethos of law enforcement. Yet, just as their relationship appeared poised to scale new emotional heights, a catastrophic event struck with the suddenness of a lightning bolt, shattering a family and plunging a community into profound disorientation. The sequence unfolded on December 11, 2004 in Gainesville, Texas. In the quiet hours past 4 in the morning, a hotel night manager received an urgent call from a distressed guest. Proceeding down the corridor to investigate, the manager found the designated guest room securely locked from the inside. Receiving no verbal response to repeated knocks, hotel management enlisted a maintenance worker to force entry through the deadbolt door. Stepping into the dimly illuminated interior, the men encountered a chaotic and alarming scene. Lying upon the floor in a crumpled, fetal position was the female guest who had initiated the emergency call. The woman appeared profoundly dazed, struggling to articulate coherent words, and visibly bleeding from a severe head wound where a projectile had penetrated her skull just above the eye. Resting on the floor, in close proximity to her body, lay a .25 caliber handgun. Emergency services were summoned, and within minutes, police officers and paramedics flooded the hotel room. The initial priority focused entirely on stabilizing the critically injured woman, who was swiftly transported to an area trauma center. Back at the scene, investigators surveyed the disarray, noting the presence of alcohol containers and over-the-counter sleeping aids. Finding no other occupants within the room, authorities were confronted with two starkly divergent hypotheses. Either the woman had inflicted the catastrophic injury upon herself in a botched suicide attempt, or an assailant had executed an attack and fled. The complexity of the situation escalated exponentially when investigators identified the wounded woman as Denise Miller. A parallel realization established that Denise and her romantic partner, local police officer Wayne Irby, had been officially reported missing by their respective workplaces and families 24 hours earlier. Officer Irby had failed to report for his scheduled shift, an occurrence utterly unprecedented in his professional history. The convergence of missing persons reports and a critical shooting instantly triggered a massive investigative effort. Unraveling the underlying truth necessitated a comprehensive reconstruction of the preceding 24 hours, exposing a turbulent narrative defined by intense affection, corrosive jealousy, and ultimately homicide. Denise Swall had spent her youth in Kansas City, Missouri, where she was widely remembered as a vibrant, exceptionally popular student, exhibiting a deep-seated desire to cultivate a traditional family. She married her college sweetheart at age 22. The union produced two children, a daughter named Whitney in 1986 and a son named Walter 2 years later. However, the marriage ultimately deteriorated, culminating in a formal divorce. In 1995, seeking a clean slate away from painful memories, Denise packed up her children and relocated to the close-knit Dallas suburb of Little Elm, Texas. Securing employment with a local liquor distributor, she managed her finances prudently and successfully constructed a beautiful home for her family, projecting an image of stability and domestic success. Yet a void remained regarding romantic companionship. That void appeared to narrow in 2003 when Denise answered a knock at her front door and encountered a uniformed police officer. The officer introduced himself as Wayne Irby of the Little Elm Police Department, explaining that he had noticed her garage door open and was offering a courtesy warning. regarding recent neighborhood thefts, handing her his business card with an invitation to reach out if she ever required assistance. Wayne left a powerful
impression.
Denise deeply appreciated the gesture, particularly given the imposing yet reassuring presence of the 37-year-old officer. Wayne Irby was a 6-year veteran of the force who wore his passion for public service on his sleeve. Known as an approachable officer who actively engaged with his community, he made citizens feel secure. Merely days later, Officer Irby returned to Denise's home, not in an official capacity, but on a personal mission, acknowledging that he had been unable to dismiss her from his thoughts. Since their initial meeting, he requested the privilege of taking her out to
dinner.
Denise reciprocated the attraction instantly. Following their inaugural date, the pair established an exclusive relationship. Wayne expressed to his colleagues that he believed he had finally found the woman with whom he was ready to settle down. A divorced father himself, Wayne integrated smoothly into Denise's family dynamic, treating her children with paternal warmth and affection. To external observers, they constituted the picture of a harmonious, blended family. Nevertheless, underlying tensions soon surfaced. Denise began to harbor intense suspicions regarding Wayne's interactions with other women along his patrol
beat.
Perceiving him as a natural charmer who attracted considerable female attention, she frequently accused him of infidelity. Wayne vehemently denied these allegations, leading to heated arguments that strained the foundation of their trust. Despite these periodic storms, the couple persevered, culminating in the purchase of a shared home in 2004. Living under the same roof, however, failed to eradicate their chronic trust issues. Citing escalating friction, Wayne abruptly elected to terminate the cohabitation, packing his belongings and relocating to a rental home across
town.
Shortly thereafter, Denise experienced sudden unemployment, prompting Wayne to reconsider the separation out of a deep-seated desire to ensure financial security for her and the children. They attempted a reconciliation, but the underlying volatility remained unresolved. The situation reached a critical juncture on the morning of December 10th, 2004. Members of the Little Elm Police Department assembled for their routine morning briefing, noting a glaring absence. Officer Wayne Irby was missing from his usual seat, having built a reputation for punctuality and absolute reliability. His unannounced absence caused immediate alarm among his
peers.
Attempts to reach him via phone yielded no response. Cynthia Medrano, Wayne's close colleague, approached the police chief to voice her profound concern, stating that something felt fundamentally wrong.
Chief
Waylon Rhodes promptly dispatched patrol units to conduct a welfare check at the residence Wayne shared with Denise and her children. The responding officers discovered the home locked and devoid of vehicles in the driveway.
Subsequent
inquiries directed toward Denise's children revealed that neither Denise nor Wayne had been seen at the residence for nearly 24 hours. Whitney, Denise's daughter, recounted a disturbing phone call received from her mother around midnight, during which Denise stated she was running errands and abruptly offered an unusually emotional declaration of love, instructing the children to manage their own school preparations the following morning. As hours stretched onward, the realization crystallized that both Wayne Irby and Denise Miller were entirely unaccounted for. Deeply troubled, Wayne's partner, Officer Jerry Walker, accompanied by Officer James Wynn, resolved to investigate the rental home Wayne had previously occupied across town. Securing a key from the landlord, the officers entered the premises. Within the kitchen, Walker immediately spotted Wayne's personal fanny pack and his cellular telephone resting on the counter, an ominous indicator that boded ill for his safety. Proceeding down the hallway, Officer Wynn rounded a corner and halted abruptly, issuing a sharp warning to his partner to halt his advance. Ignoring the cautionary instruction, Detective Walker pressed forward into the room. There, lying motionless upon the floor, was Wayne Irby. He had sustained a single, fatal gunshot wound directed precisely into the back of his head. The physical setting bore no signs of a struggle, indicating an execution-style ambush where the victim never saw the attack coming. The discovery transformed a missing persons inquiry into a full-scale homicide investigation. Detectives from the Denton County Sheriff Office and the Texas Rangers converged upon the rental home to process the grim scene. The precise placement of the entry wound suggested the shooter had positioned themselves directly behind the unsuspecting officer, while initial investigative instincts considered the possibility of a work-related vendetta given the inherent risks of police work. Close colleagues like Jerry Walker rejected that hypothesis, remembering Wayne as an amiable peacemaker universally liked within the community. Attention inevitably pivoted toward the missing girlfriend, Denise Miller. Investigators noted that while Wayne's body had been located, his personal handguns were missing from the residence, and Denise remained entirely unaccounted for. Friends struggled to reconcile the gentle persona they knew with the specter of violent crime, yet her unexplained disappearance cast a heavy shadow of suspicion. Executing a search warrant at Denise's primary residence, investigators uncovered two critical pieces of evidence within the master bedroom. A handwritten note penned by Denise that bore the unmistakable stylistic markers of a suicide ideation, and the startling discovery that Wayne's official police duty belt was hanging in the closet with its holster entirely empty. The missing service weapon, combined with the despairing tone of the letter, suggested an emerging hypothesis pointing directly toward Denise's culpability. Further archival checks revealed a dark historical precedent. In December 2003, Denise had formally filed a domestic violence complaint against Wayne following an altercation that erupted when she arrived unannounced at his rental home and discovered female belongings inside. While Denise had subsequently withdrawn the complaint and admitted fabricating the allegations. After Wayne sustained facial scratches and defended his actions, the incident underscored a volatile history characterized by extreme jealousy and possessiveness. Friends corroborated that Wayne had reached his breaking point, informing associates on the very eve of his death that he intended to terminate the relationship permanently. Armed with these disclosures, law enforcement intensified the nationwide search. For Denise Miller, the breakthrough arrived at 4 in the morning on December 11th, when Gainesville police contacted Little Elm authorities regarding the hotel shooting incident involving an unidentified female matching Denise's.
Precise description.
The subsequent recovery of Wayne's missing .40 caliber service weapon inside the hotel room, alongside a botched attempt to chamber a cartridge backward, confirmed the tragic continuum of events. Investigators subsequently recovered a third, highly detailed suicide note, authored by Denise. Within this lengthy document, she confessed to shooting Wayne, explicitly characterizing the fatal act as an accident that had triggered an immediate, panicked flight culminating in her own desperate attempt to terminate her life. Transported to a trauma center, Denise survived the self-inflicted head wound, though the trauma induced severe temporary amnesia, cognitive disorientation, and partial paralysis. When interviewed by Texas Ranger Tracy Murphy while hospitalized, Denise exhibited profound memory gaps, expressing genuine shock and denial upon being informed that Wayne was deceased and that she had inflicted a fatal injury upon him. Defense attorneys characterized her condition as a psychological protective shutdown akin to an episode of The Twilight Zone, wherein the human mind blocks out unbearable trauma. However, forensic ballistic analysis definitively matched the bullet recovered from Wayne's brain to the .40 caliber service pistol registered to Denise's stepfather, a weapon brought to the scene by Denise herself. Prosecutors argued that the required trigger pull pressure of nearly 5 pounds entirely refuted the defense's assertion of an accidental discharge, while the execution style entry wound in the back of the head precluded any credible narrative of self-defense or misadventure. Following 18 months of rigorous physical rehabilitation, Denise Miller was declared competent to stand trial. On July 10, 2006, proceedings commenced at the Denton County Courthouse. The state presented a compelling portrait of a possessive, jealous lover driven to murder upon realizing her partner was permanently severing ties. Confronted with the overwhelming weight of the physical evidence, including the confession notes, the ballistic matches, and the calculated nature of the attack, the jury deliberated for less than an hour before returning a unanimous verdict, guilty of first-degree murder, displaying a degree of mercy influenced by her frail, wheelchair-bound physical condition following her suicide attempt. The jury spared Denise the death penalty, sentencing her instead to 62 years in institutional confinement. Thus closed a devastating chapter of human tragedy born from unchecked obsession and the catastrophic failure of emotional regulation. The narrative continuum shifts once more, moving from the plains of Texas to Another poignant examination of human relationships tested to their absolute breaking point. The setting transitions to Houston, Texas, focusing on the mysterious disappearance of 19-year-old college freshman Tanisha Stewart. Her story embodies the classic archetype of a brilliant young woman striving against adverse urban circumstances to achieve academic distinction, only to encounter a catastrophic end fueled by domestic control and lethal jealousy. Tanisha Stewart was widely recognized by her family and peers as a bright, exceptionally focused individual destined for significant accomplishments. Hailing from a challenging Houston neighborhood and having endured the early loss of her father, she refused to let her environment dictate her trajectory. Applying herself diligently to her studies and earning a scholarship to Texas A&M University. Naturally gifted with striking physical attributes, she inevitably attracted numerous male suitors, yet she gravitated toward individuals who intellectually challenged her. In May 2005, while employed at a local pizza establishment, 17-year-old Tanisha crossed paths with 25-year-old Tim Shepard. Despite the 8-year age disparity, a persistent Tim successfully courted Tanisha, and their professional association rapidly evolved into an intense romantic relationship. Initially embraced by Tanisha's family, who appreciated his willingness to assist around the household with minor technical repairs, Tim initially projected the image of a devoted, reliable partner. However, as Tanisha transitioned to university life in the fall of 2006, the physical distance between Houston and the campus in College Station placed severe strain on the union. Tim exhibited increasingly possessive and domineering tendencies, routinely monitoring her whereabouts, inundating her phone with calls, and occasionally driving unannounced to the campus in attempts to locate her when she failed to respond promptly. Compounding these friction points, Tanisha experienced personal growth, expanding her social circle and initiating a parallel romantic association with a college peer named Mark Marks. When Tanisha returned home to Houston for spring break in March 2007, the unresolved tensions reached a boiling point. On the morning of Thursday, March 15th, following an evening where Tanisha had socialized with friends and received early morning phone calls from Mark Marks, Tim Shepard confronted her regarding perceived infidelity. According to Tim's initial statements to law enforcement, Tanisha reacted defensively, rebuffed his inquiries, and ultimately stormed out of his apartment on foot, leaving behind her personal belongings. That moment, according to Tim, marked the final time he ever saw her alive. When Tanisha failed to rendezvous with her family for a highly anticipated Beyoncé concert and remained entirely unreachable via cellular communication for 36 hours, her frantic relatives filed an official missing persons report. On Monday, March 19th, investigators initiated a comprehensive inquiry, interviewing the two primary figures in her recent life, Tim Shepard and Mark Marks. Mark Marks readily cooperated with law enforcement, acknowledging his romantic involvement with Tanisha while confirming that she had explicitly stated her intention to terminate her relationship with Tim. Mark established a robust, verifiable alibi, placing him miles away on South Padre Island at the time of her disappearance, effectively clearing him of any criminal culpability. Attention consequently concentrated squarely upon Tim Shepard. Investigators obtained voluntary consent to search his apartment, which initially yielded no obvious forensic evidence of a struggle. However, mounting community pressure and disturbing eyewitness accounts soon shifted the investigative paradigm. Several neighboring residents came forward with startling observations. Throughout the days immediately following Tanisha's disappearance, Tim Shepard had maintained a continuous, intensive barbecuing operation on his patio, managing multiple grills simultaneously and generating billowing clouds of smoke. That prompted complaints and subsequent visits from local firefighters. Furthermore, residents reported detecting an overwhelming chemical odor of industrial bleach emanating from his patio area, so potent that it physically irritated neighboring eyes. When questioned by emergency personnel regarding the massive grilling session, Tim offered conflicting explanations, claiming he was preparing bulk food for an upcoming church picnic while firefighters observed suspicious meat items soaking in a bathtub indoors. The investigation took a dramatic psychological turn when Tanisha's family enlisted the assistance of prominent community activist Quan Nell-X to facilitate a dialogue with Tim Shepard, while parallel efforts by Tim's own family sought guidance to protect him from perceived police overreach. Confronted privately by Quan Nell-X inside his apartment, Tim underwent a profound psychological collapse. Urged to look his interviewer in the eye and speak the unvarnished truth, Tim broke down, confessing that upon confronting Tanisha regarding Marks, he had flown into an uncontrollable rage, strangled her to death in the entryway, and subsequently disposed of her body. Armed with this dramatic confession, Quan Nell-X notified investigator Sydney Miller. Tim Shepard was taken into custody, and authorities escorted him to a local dumpster where he claimed to have discarded the victim's remains. However, upon arrival at the coordinate point, investigators discovered the dumpster had already been systematically emptied and transported to a massive municipal landfill. Given the astronomical financial and logistical impossibility of recovering human remains within a sprawling landfill, investigators refocused their forensic efforts entirely upon Tim's apartment, executing an intensive, microscopic search of the premises crime scene. Technicians uncovered critical physical evidence, bone fragments lodged within the garbage disposal, structural tooth enamel positively identified through dental records as belonging to Tanisha Stewart, and charred bone fragments recovered from the vicinity of the patio grills. The forensic consensus painted a horrifying picture. Tim Shepard had systematically dismembered Tanisha's body, utilized the garbage disposal to destroy dental and skeletal evidence, and incinerated her remains using high-temperature grilling equipment before disposing of the ashes. Indicted formally for first-degree murder, Tim Shepard faced a jury trial. Commencing on September 29, 2008, prosecutors constructed a compelling circumstantial case anchored by the recovered tooth. Enamel the accounts of continuous barbecuing, the bleach cleanup, and the devastating testimony of Quan X, who recounted Tim's detailed confession regarding the strangulation and subsequent mutilation. Additionally, Tim's own cousin, Nicholas Shepard, testified that Tim had historically boasted that if any romantic partner ever attempted to leave him, he would murder them and boil their remains. Taking the stand in his own defense during the sentencing phase, Tim executed a desperate legal pivot, testifying that Tanisha had initiated a violent physical assault against him with a coffee table knife during an argument over marks, and that he had acted purely in self-defense during a chaotic struggle that resulted in her accidental death. He further admitted that in a state of blind panic, he utilized his backyard smoker to dispose of the body. The jury rejected his self-defense narrative outright, upholding the conviction and sentencing Tim Shepard to 99 years of institutional confinement within the Texas Department of Criminal Justice. The verdict brought a measure of formal closure to Tanisha's grieving family, ensuring that a brilliant young woman's memory was honored through the ultimate triumph of justice over unbridled malice. The tapestry of human relationships is as vast as it is unpredictable. Within its weave lie threads of profound devotion, quiet sacrifice, and noble affection. Yet, upon occasion, dark threads of obsession, possessiveness, and self-delusion interlace themselves into the pattern, transforming what began as a promise of devotion into a tragic spectacle. When light is cast upon these shadowed corners, society is reminded of both the fragility of human existence and the unwavering resolve of those who seek the truth. Through meticulous investigation, moral courage, and an unyielding commitment to justice, the hidden deeds of the night are dragged into the clarifying light of day. Part 1. The Shadows on Interstate 540. The winter sun rising over Raleigh, North Carolina, on the morning of Wednesday, January 30th, 2008, offered little warmth to the crisp air. The sky was a pale, washed-out blue, and a sharp freeze hung over the rolling highways that encircled the city. Along Interstate 540, the morning rush was building into its routine crescendo. Thousands of commuters sat inside their heated automobiles, sipping coffee and listening to morning broadcasts, their minds focused on meetings, deadlines, and the mundane rhythms of daily life. Shortly after 7 o'clock in the morning, that mundane routine was abruptly shattered. Commuters traveling westbound near a quiet stretch of the highway noticed something unnatural lying on the grassy embankment just beyond the shoulder. At first glance, through the frost-rimed glass of passing windshields, it appeared to be nothing more than discarded trash or an oversized bundle of clothing. But as the morning light strengthened, driver after driver realized, with a jolt of horror, that it was the motionless body of a young woman. Calls began pouring into the 911 dispatch center. First responders sped toward the scene, their sirens cutting through the winter chill. When emergency personnel and local law enforcement arrived on the grassy slope, they quickly confirmed the worst. The young woman lying frozen in the winter grass was beyond all medical help. She had succumbed to a ferocious and relentless physical attack. Initial thoughts among the first officers on the scene gravitated toward the possibility of an accident. Highway margins occasionally claimed pedestrians or stranded motorists struck by passing traffic, but a closer inspection by homicide detectives dispelled any notion of a hit-and-run collision. There were no blunt force tire impacts or highway drag marks. Instead, the victim's upper body, neck, and face bore the unmistakable signs of a violent, targeted assault. She had been stabbed repeatedly with a sharp, heavy blade. Her carotid artery and jugular vein had been severed, her vocal cords cut, and her hands displayed deep defensive wounds, proving she had fought valiantly for her life until her final breath. The crime scene was a ghastly sight, personal and brimming with overwhelming fury. To inflict dozens of sharp force wounds required proximity, intention, and an extraordinary level of rage. Yet, near the body, there was no murder weapon, no discarded outer garments, and no immediate eyewitnesses. The busy highway offered an endless stream of passing cars, but none had stopped to witness the act itself. As major crimes detectives began canvassing the stretch of highway and arranging for the victim's body to be covered, traffic slowed to a crawl. Among the hundreds of rubbernecking commuters caught in the backup was a young man named Darren Curtis. It was approximately 7:45 in the morning. Darren was on his routine drive to work, navigating the familiar lanes of Interstate 540, seeing the flashing blue lights and the blue tarp laid out over the embankment. A heavy, unexplainable sense of foreboding settled in his chest. Slowly moving past the active crime scene, Darren glanced toward the shoulder. Half a mile down the road, there, parked quietly against the guardrail, was a white sedan. His heart skipped a beat. The vehicle bore an uncanny resemblance to the car driven by his 21-year-old wife, Latrice. Panic overtook curiosity. Darren pulled his vehicle onto the shoulder, stepped out, and approached the white sedan. A quick check confirmed his terror. The car belonged to Latrice. Frantic and overwhelmed, Darren ran back toward the cluster of police cruisers and identified himself to the officers securing the perimeter. Detectives gently escorted him aside, verified his details, and delivered the devastating truth. The young woman under the blue tarp was indeed
Latrice Curtis.
News of the murder sent shockwaves through Latrice's family. Her father received the phone call that every parent dreads. The grief was instantaneous, sharp, and disorienting. To those who knew her, Latrice was a beacon of promise and vitality. Growing up in a warm home surrounded by protective older brothers, she had been a bright, popular student with an infectious smile and a natural capacity for warmth. She was a young woman who prioritized her education above all else, earning acceptance to a local college before transferring to the prestigious North Carolina Central University in Durham to pursue a degree in business administration. It was during her early college years that Latrice had met Darren Curtis, an ambitious accounting student and former National Guard soldier. Darren was polite, respectful, and mature, quickly winning the admiration of Latrice's protective family. The young couple fell deeply in love, marrying after a year of courtship. By January 2008, they had been married for just 9 months, living together in a cozy apartment and building what appeared to be an enviable future. Now, that future was irrevocably shattered. Detectives with the Wake County Sheriff's Office faced a complex mystery. Who could harbor such monstrous hatred for a popular, driven 21-year-old college student? The crime scene yielded its first technical clues when forensic technicians processed Latrice's abandoned white sedan. Inside the cabin, the center console was fractured, indicating a violent physical struggle had occurred within the confines of the front seats. Blood spatter was recovered from the driver's side door. Furthermore, crime scene investigators recovered foreign genetic material from the steering wheel, suggesting that someone other than Latrice had operated the vehicle shortly before or after her death. In homicide investigations, close associates are examined first, not out of immediate suspicion, but to establish a baseline of the victim's final hours. Detectives sat down with Darren Curtis to construct a timeline. Darren explained that he had last spoken with Latrice the previous evening at approximately 10 o'clock. She had called to mention she was running late from her studies and planned to grab something to eat before heading home. Darren went to sleep around 11:30 in the evening. When he awoke the following morning, Latrice was not in bed. He called her mobile phone around 7 o'clock in the morning, but the call went straight to voicemail, assuming she had stayed overnight at her parents' house after studying late. He showered and departed for work, only to stumble upon the crime scene on Interstate 540. Detectives examined Darren's clothing and physical appearance. He unbuttoned his sleeves and collar at their request. There were no scratches, abrasions, bruised knuckles, or cuts on his body, nor was there any physical evidence connecting him or his vehicle to the violence. His phone records corroborated his statements. He had indeed placed the morning call precisely when he claimed. However, the autopsy report brought forth an unexpected revelation that altered the trajectory of the investigation. Medical examiners discovered a used condom retained within Latrice's body. Physical examination showed no trauma or injuries consistent with sexual assault, suggesting that the intimate encounter had been consensual and had occurred shortly before her death. This discovery raised critical questions. Whose genetic material was present? Was this an extramarital encounter, and could it be connected to the murderess fury unleashed on the highway? Subpoenaed telephone records provided the next breakthrough. A detailed audit of Latrice's mobile phone usage showed a flurry of late-night calls and text. Messages exchanged around midnight on the night of her death. The numbers traced directly to a young man named Stephen Randolph. Stephen Randolph was well known at North Carolina Central University. A handsome, charismatic athlete, he was a standout basketball player with aspirations of playing professionally in the National Basketball Association. 2. Detectives, Randolph represented a vital link in the chain of events. 2 days after the discovery of Latrice's body, Stephen Randolph walked into the Wake County Sheriff's Office. He was not alone. Accompanying him was his landlord and housemate, a 43-year-old local minister named Robert Lee Adams Reeves. Robert Reeves was a prominent figure in Durham's evangelical circles. Known affectionately as the Bishop, Reeves was a charismatic public speaker and motivational figure who projected an air of piety and civic leadership. He had met Randolph at a car wash months prior, learned the young athlete was facing financial hardships, and offered him a basement apartment in his home for a modest monthly rent of $300. In the interrogation room, Randolph was initially guarded. He claimed he and Latrice were merely classmates who occasionally studied together. But when detectives presented him with the phone records and the findings of the medical examiner, Randolph dropped his guard and confessed to an extramarital affair. Randolph explained that Latrice had visited his apartment on the night of Tuesday, January 29th. They engaged in an intimate encounter during which the condom became trapped inside her. Unable to retrieve it, Latrice departed his residence around 10 o'clock in the evening, intending to resolve the issue at home. Shortly thereafter, Randolph left to visit his primary girlfriend, Velma Newton. However, throughout the late evening and into the early morning hours, Latrice repeatedly called Randolph's cell phone. She was frantic, worried about the potential of an unintended pregnancy and contemplating what this meant for her marriage and her future. Randolph insisted to detectives that he did not meet her that night after she left his house, and that he had no involvement whatsoever in her death. Detectives noted that an unwanted pregnancy and a public scandal could severely derail a aspiring athlete's professional basketball dreams, presenting a classic motive. Yet Randolph's alibi held up under initial scrutiny. Velma Newton confirmed that Randolph had arrived at her residence around 10 o'clock in the evening and stayed until roughly 1 o'clock in the morning. Velma also provided investigators with a peculiar piece of information. She revealed that in the weeks leading up to the murder, both she and Randolph had been tormented by a series of anonymous, threatening telephone calls. The caller, hiding behind blocked numbers, warned Randolph to terminate his romantic relationships and threatened to ruin his athletic career. The harassment had escalated to physical vandalism. Just days earlier, Randolph had walked out to his vehicle to find all 4 tires slashed. While detectives worked to make sense of these anonymous threats, a critical phone call arrived from State Trooper Isaac Cooper. Trooper Cooper recalled Patrolling Interstate 540 during the early morning hours of January 30th, at approximately 1:30 in the morning, 6 hours before Latrice's body was discovered, Cooper had observed two vehicles parked on opposite shoulders of the highway with their hazard lights flashing. On the westbound shoulder sat a white sedan matching the description of Latrice's vehicle. On the eastbound shoulder sat another automobile. Trooper. Cooper had stopped behind the eastbound vehicle to check for disabled motorists, but found it empty. He ran the license plate through dispatch before being called away to an urgent call nearby. Dispatch subsequently reported that the empty car was registered to none other than Pastor Robert Lee Adams Reeves. The revelation was astounding. What was the revered minister's vehicle doing? Parked on a darkened highway shoulder at 1:30 in the morning, directly across from the victim's abandoned car? Detectives summoned Pastor Robert Reeves back for detailed questioning. Sitting across from investigators, the pastor maintained a smooth, composed demeanor. He claimed he had spent the evening of January 29th at a church service before returning home, where he remained for the rest of the night. He suggested that Stephen Randolph might have borrowed his car, as Randolph had access to a spare set of keys. However, as the pastor spoke, detectives observed distinct physical marks on his body. Reeves had fresh scratches and abrasions on his hands and forearms. When asked to explain the injuries, Reeves claimed he and Randolph had fallen while moving a heavy desk inside the home a few days earlier. Detectives methodically began dismantling the pastor's story. First, they interviewed Reeves' sister, Willa Mae Thorpe, who attended the same church. She stated firmly that her brother had not been present at the church service on the night in question. Second, detectives interviewed Stephen Randolph regarding the supposed desk-moving incident. Randolph expressed confusion, stating that no such move had taken place and that he had never seen the pastor fall or sustain injuries. Most importantly, Randolph revealed a deeply unsettling dynamic within the household. He disclosed that Pastor Reeves had developed an unhealthy, possessive obsession with him. Randolph recounted a specific incident where Reeves entered his basement apartment shortly after Latrice had visited. The pastor began asking intrusive questions about Randolph's intimate life, made inappropriate personal inquiries, and ultimately propositioned Randolph, offering to waive his monthly rent in exchange for sexual favors. Randolph had firmly rejected the pastor's advances. Shortly after that rejection, the anonymous, threatening phone calls to Randolph and Velma had commenced, along with the slashing of Randolph's tires. Subpoenaed phone records confirmed the suspicion. The blocked, harassing calls made to Randolph and Velma originated directly from Pastor Reeves' personal mobile phone. The psychological picture of the pastor transformed dramatically. Behind the charismatic facade of a religious leader lay a predatory individual with a history of predatory behavior toward younger men. Investigators realized that Reeves was consumed by overwhelming, irrational jealousy regarding Randolph's romantic encounters with women. Forensic science soon provided the definitive link. State crime lab technicians analyzed the genetic material recovered from the steering wheel and interior of Latrice Curtis's white sedan. The foreign deoxyribonucleic acid did not belong to her husband Darren, nor did it belong to Stephen Randolph.
It was an exact
match to Pastor Robert Lee Adams Reeves.
Furthermore, the physical scratches on
Reeves' forearms aligned precisely with the defensive wounds inflicted by Latrice as she fought for her life. The prosecution reconstructed the horrific sequence of events. On the night of January 29th, Pastor Reeves had observed Latrice visiting Randolph's basement apartment. Consumed by irrational rage and possessive jealousy, Reeves retrieved a heavy knife from his collection at home and trailed Latrice as she drove onto Interstate 540. He managed to signal or force her to pull over onto the shoulder. Whether he tricked her into opening her door or forced his way inside, a violent struggle ensued within her car. Reeves stabbed Latrice repeatedly before dragging her body across the median lanes and leaving her on the far grassy embankment. He then abandoned his own vehicle when it experienced mechanical issues, fleeing the scene on foot into the dark. In his warped mind, removing Latrice was an act of elimination born of an obsessive fantasy that removing female rivals would somehow compel Randolph to turn to him. On February 2nd, 2008, law enforcement formally arrested Pastor Robert Lee Adams Reeves and charged him with first-degree murder. The news sent shockwaves through the Durham community, leaving congregation members in profound disbelief. The trial commenced on September 29, 2009, in a Wake County courtroom. Prosecutors presented a compelling case built upon rock-solid forensic evidence, cell phone location data, phone records documenting the harassment, and the testimony of State Trooper Cooper. Defense attorneys attempted to argue that the genetic material found in the car was merely transferred deoxyribonucleic acid picked up from door handles at the house, and suggested that Randolph might have been the true killer. However, the prosecution effectively countered these arguments. They pointed to the deep scratches on Reeves' arms, his fabricated church alibi, and the sheer impossibility of such an immense quantity of foreign genetic material appearing inside the victim's car through casual transfer. On October 9, 2009, after brief deliberations, the jury returned a verdict of guilty. Robert Lee Adams Reeves was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. While justice was delivered in the eyes of the law, the tragedy left lingering
scars.
Darren Curtis was left to rebuild a life shattered by an unthinkable act of mindless obsession. The memory of Latrice Curtis remains preserved by a loving family who remember her not for the tragic manner of her death, but for the brilliant, joyful light she brought into the world during her 21
years.
Part 2. The Echoes of Little Elm. In the early morning hours of Saturday, December 11th, 2004, a Heavy silence hung over the city of Gainesville, Texas. Located near the Oklahoma border, the town was quiet, its residents asleep in the cool darkness. Preceding dawn, shortly past 4 o'clock in the morning, that silence was broken by a frantic internal telephone call received by the night manager of a local motel. A female guest in room 147 was speaking in slurred, barely audible tones, indicating she was in deep distress. The manager hurried down the carpeted hallway and knocked firmly on the door. Receiving no coherent verbal response, he attempted to use a master key, only to discover the interior deadbolt was engaged. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, the manager summoned a maintenance worker, and together they forced the door open. The scene inside room 147 was disorienting and grim. The room was in complete disarray, littered with discarded items.